Hello, crypto hippies. Welcome to the latest drum circle. Today we're going to talk about unconventional lifestyles, unconventional ways of thinking about work and building your life and constructing your life in such a way that you're not working a 9 to 5 until you die. One of those potential ways of being a little bit unconventional is the digital nomad lifestyle, which the three of us more or less identify with, I think. So let's start off maybe talking a little bit about our own personal situations for some context. Chris, do you want to say a little bit about your story?
Yeah, so I definitely think that having a sort of a conventional way of thinking about jobs and income is an integral part of being a crypto hippie. I kind of started, it always starts when you sort of, you have a conventional job, a 9 to 5 job, and then you quit that job to go pursue sort of more entrepreneurial things. Like, I really don't want to work for somebody else. I'd much rather work for myself. Mm-hmm. And so actually, I quit my job in 2016 with the goal of not working again until I did find that thing, that sort of business that I wanted to start. So yeah, I was working as a software developer in 2016, or I guess it was 2015. And then I kind of tried starting some software startups, and I kind of burned myself out, and I started having some health problems. And so I realized at one point at the beginning of 2016 that it wasn't really, it was much more worth my time not to work than it was to work, because my health problems had gotten so bad that I couldn't focus on working anyway. So I felt like I was just wasting my time. So that was the first step. I kind of just quit my job. And I said, I'm not going to work. There's a huge amount of kind of anxiety that happened around that decision. And I think a lot of people have this. There's a huge amount of social pressure around basically being busy or appearing to be busy pretty much all the time. And then once you kind of step out of that and you say, you know what, no, I don't see the utility of being busy all the time. And you step away from that and you do it for a while. For me, there was kind of a month of panic where I was like, oh, I don't know what to do. I don't know how to explain this to people. But then you kind of get used to it and you get more comfortable with it. And, you learn not to feel sort of guilty or shameful when people ask you, why you're not working. Basically,
I think the obvious question people are going to be like, but hang on, how did you pay your rent?
Right.
Yeah, exactly. So if you are going to quit your job, or you're thinking about quitting your job, it is important to have some savings. Let's get that right out. If you quit your job and you don't have any savings, you're not going to have a very good time. So you've got to save up. You got to figure out basically how much money you tend to spend per month. And then you need to save up at least probably, for me, I actually wasn't planning to take like 3 years off from work. I was planning to take like a few months off from work. And then basically I had a lot of my savings in Bitcoin. And so, and it started going up a lot around that time. And so I ended up not needing to go back to work, but that was always kind of my backup option. I was like, well, if I run out of money, or if Bitcoin goes to zero or something like that, at least I can just go back and continue being a software developer. So you really do want to have, a cushion of savings, and then you want to have a backup option where you can go back to work or just work harder, and in case things don't pan out. So that's what I did. I had like maybe 6 months worth of savings when I quit my job, and then. A year later, Bitcoin had gone up so much that I had like more than that. So that was pretty cool. I got lucky. Not everybody gets lucky, but Bitcoin is so volatile that if you save up during the bear market, I would say it actually is pretty likely that you'll end up being able to take off longer from work than you initially thought possible. But again, don't put all of your eggs in one basket. Be
Right.
diversified. That's
Right.
important.
Right. So that's one route. I know Kurt, when we met initially, you were living in Guadalajara, and now I don't know that much about where you are at any given time. It seems like every time we talk, every episode we have, you're in a different part of the world. So how's that going?
Yeah, Kurt's a true digital nomad.
Yeah. Kurt's the most nomad of all of us, for sure.
At the moment, anyway. Yeah, it's kind of, I was in Britain for around 5 months, and then I guess I nearly overstayed my welcome here. So, so now I'm in Cava, like an hour outside of Pedrógão Grande in Portugal. But yeah, I've been traveling around a lot. So with my story, I guess that it kind of started when I was playing cards, and I started to realize, hang on, I can make money gambling, and it's just playing a card game, and I can make money doing this. So eventually I had a job, and I cut my work hours down to like 20 hours a week. And so I was at the casino 7 days a week. And then eventually I kind of moved away from cards, but my next job, I was working 25 hours a week. And this is a thing, like everybody has this expectation. So in my office, one of the team leaders said to me, so what are you studying? You're working part-time, right? I'm like, I'm not studying. I just like living. So it's a weird thing too, because I'm living in Melbourne. I was living in Melbourne at the time. And a lot of people have this impression. Melbourne is probably one of the most, not the most expensive, but it's probably like, I don't know, top 20 cities in the world.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not actually that hard to get by part-time. So that's a weird thing. People have these different priorities, like like you were saying before we started, Katy, like people want to spend the money on just frivolities, I guess. And in Australia, it costs a lot for alcohol and cigarettes. The taxes are like 50% or like maybe 100%. I'm not even sure. People spend a lot of money that way. And I didn't do that. I spent money just having a good time and learned to cook and all these other skills. Anyway, I had a similar thing to Chris. I didn't have quite as much savings. So I'd saved up a bit of Bitcoin. And I was buying towards the peak in 2013, and I had a few $1,000s, and I'd already been thinking about leaving Australia for Mexico or for somewhere. And in preparation, I'd taken a course to teach English as a foreign language. So when I saw Bitcoin shoot up, I was like, all right, I'm out of here. So I booked a flight to Mexico and lived there for a while, teaching English online. And then later, Steemit came along, and I did quite well on Steemit, because in the early days, there weren't really many serious content creators on there. And I've been a writer for years. So I was like, all right, here's an opportunity. I jumped right on it, started writing articles, like one a day, every day, and made some thousands of dollars or something ridiculous. And that made me some money. And then, yeah, I guess, nice. I guess I've been posting along ever since. Yeah.
For me, my first dive into the world of like a little bit non-traditional lifestyle was just after I left college. I had a job at a call center, and I decided to ask my boss if I could only work 32 hours a week instead of 40 hours a week, because I wanted more time just to be free and live life. And that worked out perfectly fine. But as soon as I did that, like everyone around me, all my coworkers and my parents and my friends were pretty shocked. They were like, what are you doing? What are you doing with all that extra time? Oh, so you're working part-time, so you must be in school. Oh, you must be doing something else on the side. Or like, why are you only working 32 hours a week? And for me, it was just because, well, I could really easily cover my living expenses with 32 hours a week. So why would I work 40 hours a week doing something that I didn't want to do so much? So that was kind of the first step. And then after having some more normal career job type things for a while, I decided to take a couple months off, and I found a job on Craigslist just doing online transcriptions and subtitling for videos. And as soon as I had that, I realized, based on some books that I had read and some internet communities that I've been in, hey, I'm in a position now where I could live abroad and work very, very part-time and cover all of my expenses that way. So for a little over a year, I was working maybe 10 hours a week, 15 hours a week max, living in the, like, right next to the beach in a beautiful area of Mexico. And that really allowed me the time and space to figure out more what I wanted to do with my life. So yeah, I think you can get creative, and you definitely don't have to be in like this grind mode, even if you're not a person who has a ton of high powered skills and earns a ton of money per hour, because I certainly wasn't.
Yeah. And I want to add that, you know, everybody kind of looks at you weird when you're like, I don't work full time or I don't work at all. But for me, this probably wasn't true, you know, a decade or two ago, but, and it maybe isn't true for everybody even now, but now I feel like free time is actually more valuable than work time, because I find like one-on-one interactions with other people to be really valuable, in person and on the internet. The more time that I can spend, you know, kind of having an interaction with somebody, the more value I get. And like, if you're always spending the same time, always spending, you know, all your entire day in like an office around the same people, then you're going to miss out on a lot of stuff that's happening. And I guess maybe part of it is just like FOMO, just, you know, oh, there's all this stuff going on, and, you know, I want to be part of it. But I do think there is something to that. I think there is something to like, well, if you have enough time to pay attention to all the stuff that's happening, you have more time to kind of filter out all of the noise and find the signal in the noise. Whereas if you're just always, you know, always in an office, you don't really have that bird's eye view of everything. And you can't really as easily figure out which projects are actually worth your time to spend time on versus those that are kind of a waste of time.
Yeah, that's definitely true. I mean, when I was working full-time or going to school full-time and in university full-time, I didn't really have a lot of mental space to get to know myself and what I wanted to do long-term. And now I feel like I'm finally getting more of an idea of what I'd like to do with my life, and actually putting a lot more energy into work. So right now, for the first time in my life, I feel like my work time is really valuable, and I'm working a lot more than I'm doing anything else. Like, just within the past few months, that's been the case.
Right, because you've maybe because you've found you feel confident that the thing that you're working on is the thing that you should be working on.
Right. And that's not a position that I was in before. So yeah, I think that if you have the opportunity to take some time off of work full time, that's an amazing thing to do for like personal development and figuring out what you want to do going forward, whether that is being a workaholic or being a beach bum like I was for a while in the long term.
Well, what you said, Chris, it reminds me of that book, The E-Myth. Do you know that book?
I haven't heard of it, no.
No? Okay. The E-Myth is the entrepreneurial myth. And it's about how to structure a small business more like a huge business, and with well-established roles clearly articulated and this sort of thing. But it talks about how a lot of small business owners go wrong, where they don't structure things so they have time to strategize, so that all the time putting out these little fires left and right. And that means they can't actually take the time to plan to expand the business.
Right.
And I guess it works the same in life.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing is, I remember a friend of mine told me in certain cultures, especially in India, if someone says, actually, I just need time to figure things out. Like, I don't really know what I'm doing with my life at the moment. And you could go to your brother or your sister or your parents and say, can I just like stay on your couch for a month while I figure out what's going on in my head and my life? And they'll be like, yeah, sure, brother, come in, sit down, let me get you something to eat. But we don't have that in the West, because it's like that, like you were saying, Chris, that focus of busyness.
Right. And people do have, I think a lot of millennials, to use a buzzword, are doing that with their parents. Their parents have a house, and they have like a room maybe that they stayed in as kids. And so a lot of people are in that kind of burnout mode where they know, deep inside, they know that they need to take time off and zoom out and figure out what they really want to do with their lives. And they're losing motivation to work on whatever it is that's earning them money. And so they're kind of forced to go to their parents' house or whatever. But I think in Western culture, there's a lot more guilt and shame associated with doing that than, as you were talking about in India. In the US, maybe people aren't going to tell you like, oh, you're a worthless bum, you're staying on my couch, or you're staying in your room, like go out and get a job. But maybe they will say that. But more importantly, you're going to feel that they're thinking that. And that's going to, it prevents you from actually being able to relax enough to do that thing that you want to do, to zoom out and take a look at your life and spend time with yourself, get to know yourself, experiment with this or that. If you're constantly feeling shame that you're not busy all the time, then you're kind of just going to, you're going to keep trying to look busy, and you're never going to actually solve the problem.
Yeah, I think the shame is a big part of it because, in the West and in the US in particular, there are a lot of people that live at home and there are a lot of people that are unemployed. But it is kind of with the feeling of, oh my God, I need to have a job right now. I need to do this. I need to be figuring this out immediately, which is good because you don't want to just be at home, like wasting away, not planning anything with your life. But on the flip side, you do need to, like you said, actually relax and actually get to a point where you're okay with not having it figured out in order to be able to figure it out.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. Practically, I think that this idea is kind of scary for a lot of people. Like, I know it was terrifying for me. And when I was reading, Tim Ferriss's 4-Hour Workweek, which is a book that was really inspiring for a lot of digital nomads, that was the big thing for me, was it seemed kind of unattainable. Like, how do you just break away from the need to work constantly? Because it is a need. Like, if you don't have a lot of savings, you have to have something coming in constantly. How can you put yourself in a position where you can just move to a different country and work online? It seems kind of scary. So maybe we could talk about some opportunities for people.
Well, I want to comment that if you are trying to kind of do the 4-hour work week philosophy, or as we were talking about earlier, the sort of FIRE philosophy, financial independence, retire early or whatever, it's important to spend less money. And that's actually like the number one thing that you need to focus on. You need to figure out which things you're spending too much money on and spend less money on those things. And so moving to a different country is actually a strategy for spending less money. For me, it definitely was. I mean, when I was like, I have 6 months in savings, I was like, or I could move to Mexico and have like a couple of years of savings, because it's just so much cheaper in Mexico than in the US. So for me, living abroad was, it was a big challenge, but at the same time, I was getting creative about spending less money.
Yeah. That was a huge thing for me too. Like, when I say that I was working 10, maybe 15 hours a week max at like not a highly skilled job and, getting by, that's because I was spending about $500 a month.
Yeah. Exactly.
When I moved to Mexico, I was probably living on like $200, $300 a month. So I think people need to factor that in. Like, the people do have this idea you need like, I don't know, $2,000, $3,000 a month to live. And in some parts of the world, you definitely do not.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. If you're living in a major city in the US, you do need, well, depending on where you are, at least $1,500, $2,000 a month.
Yeah. But I remember even when I was living in Melbourne, and I was living quite cheaply. And I talked to my buddy, and I said, "Oh, I think I can move to Latin America, and I'll be living on like $500 a month." And he's like, "I live on $500 a month now." So there are ways, but you have to be smart.
That's true. That's true. There absolutely are ways. If you don't want to move to a third world country, you could also maybe move into like a co-op house where your rent is $250 a month, and that includes shared food staples. There's places like that, even in a lot of relatively large cities in the U.S.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if you want to, I know so many people who are just like, no, I couldn't possibly save money right now. I'm spending every penny that I earn, and I'm like, well. Do you really, really have to spend all that money? I mean, I bet if you got creative, you could figure out a way to cut expenses. And honestly, rent is the thing that is the most overpriced in the US. Rent and maybe food. Although for me, actually spending more on food is important because it's important for my health. But yeah, I mean, now that people can work online, the reasons for living in any one particular place are becoming, less and less important. So if you can work online, you can go live in Mexico, like I was saying, and spend, as you were saying, Kurt, $500 a month, maybe $200, $300 a month. You can live extremely cheaply, but you do have to kind of think outside the box.
Yeah. Well, and this opportunity, it's not just available for Westerners. It is easier if you're a Westerner because like it's automatic for you to be able to work online and earn US dollars and then live somewhere else where it's cheaper. But I've also met several Mexicans here who are doing kind of a similar thing. You just find a way to enter the online global marketplace. And if you can inch your way into like Western prices, you can do very, very well.
Yeah, exactly.
One thing I think is really important, like when I first started writing on Steemit and I was recommending it to a lot of artist friends, especially Mexicans, living there at the time, and some of them were like, I don't know, or they just didn't feel motivated. Even people with quite a portfolio of artwork or whatever it was, or they would say, sound like a scam. So the lesson is you have to be open to new opportunities. Like the thing that gets you out of the box isn't going to look like a thing that's within the box. It's going to look like something very different.
Oh, yeah. Definitely. I mean, Bitcoin is a perfect example of this. When I first invested in it, I was like, I have all my savings in Bitcoin. And people were like, you're crazy. But yeah, exactly. I just want to like hammer on that point that you just made, Kurt, that if you're being creative, that means that you're thinking differently from what everybody else is thinking. So, maybe some of the things actually are crazy and won't work out. But if you try enough things that other people aren't trying, you'll eventually stumble upon something that really works for you.
That's a good point. I think a lot of people fail multiple times before they succeed. My way of going abroad was pretty safe, all things considered. Like I had a semi-normal job that I had been already working at for about a year before I took the plunge. I was pretty conservative in my crazy decision, but a lot of people were not. And there are a lot of people who set out on the digital nomad path and then end up having to stumble or go back a few times.
And I wanna also bring up that crypto was like most of the reason why I decided to have this alternative lifestyle, because I kind of realized that it was going to be a good investment. And so it motivated me to save money. Before I discovered crypto, I was kind of saving money a little bit. Like I was really, really trying to spend less money than I earned. And it was kind of hard, And then once I started putting my money into Bitcoin, I was like, man, this might go up 10 times. It might go up 100 times. It's really, really, really worth saving. And it's really, really worth saving now because it's cheap. And so it just kind of like made it much easier to spend less money. Because I was like, I'm basically, I know that I'm foregoing, whatever I'd be spending money on now so that I can have 10 times as much money in the future. I think that's what, like, the reason why I identify with the crypto hippie label is because like crypto is what pushed me out of that conventional lifestyle. I think a lot of people are kind of stuck in that system where they're saving money in a savings account, and their savings account is not even paying enough interest to keep up with inflation. So they're basically saving this money, and then it's kind of just like, going down in value over time. And it's kind of like, well, what's the point? I might as well just spend all my money as soon as I get it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, even if you're not getting a lot of interest, though, I still think that you can make a huge impact on your life by saving a lot. This is more for people who actually have a decently high income. Like if you're making, let's say, even $60,000 US per year, and you're living in a US city, it's not unreasonable to think that you would be able to cut down your expenses to $25,000 a year. There's a lot of people who do it. And then if you cut your expense to $25,000 a year and you save up $250,000 in 10 years, and then you like invest it relatively wisely, you could probably go live in Thailand on that for the rest of your life extremely comfortably. Not saying that that's the option that everybody would want to do, but it is an option. And I don't think most people see that at all.
Yeah. I know, actually, interestingly, I know a lot of people in Russia say they buy an apartment in Moscow, and then they're like, all right, I guess I'm good. And they rent out the apartment and they go live in Thailand, and they have a really great life. So for some reason, that's an idea that's people see as credible and realistic in Russia. I don't know why.
Interesting. Did you spend time in Russia meeting people like that, or did you?
I had a lot of Russian students.
Okay, yeah, that's an interesting idea. Yeah, because in Thailand, what would you say a reasonable cost of living would be in Thailand?
Let's see. Well, I remember I was staying in a guest house in Chiang Mai, and Chiang Mai is really nice, and I was paying something like $5 a night. I think it was even $5 Australian dollars a night. So like $3 US a night for a private room. It was like, it came up $1 a night for a dorm room. I'm like, oh, I'm going to go on and get the private room.
That's renting nightly. That's not even renting an apartment.
Exactly.
That's
exactly. Yeah. So you get a proper apartment, or get a room in a share house or something, and you probably live comfortably in Thailand for $200-300 a month easily.
I think a lot of what's keeping people from doing this is that they just don't know. They just don't have the information. Their friends aren't talking about like, oh, did you know that you can live comfortably in Chiang Mai for $150 a month? People don't realize it. They think they have to stay where they are because that's what everybody else is doing. They think they see everybody else and everybody else is paying rent. Everybody else is, buying groceries. Everybody else is doing, this and that for entertainment. And they just say like, well, $1,000 a month is, my absolute minimum, I have to have that to live in, whatever city in the US they're living in.
Yeah, your frame of reference is really small if you never get outside the country and experience other things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There are drawbacks, though. There are drawbacks. I mean, we should be honest about that. Like the lifestyle that I was living super cheaply. I no health insurance. It's not exactly a long-term savings plan. It's expensive if you want to travel anywhere else. Like relative to your income, you have to really, really save up for a plane ticket. It can be isolating, though. There's more and more people doing it now, so you're pretty likely to connect with some like-minded people. And once you learn the language a little bit of wherever you are, then it's not so isolating anymore. And you can pull yourself away from like opportunities to climb the corporate ladder at home, if that's your goal.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned health insurance, because I remember thinking, like one of the things that pushed me. Well, of course, I was talking about earlier how my health my lack of healthiness basically is another thing that pushed me into this alternative lifestyle other than crypto. For me, like, I just remember thinking like, okay, my back is falling apart. I have this, this lower back pain. And I remember going to the doctor, going to some chiropractors, going to some physical therapists, and just spending huge amounts of money on consultations and like injections and stuff, which didn't help at all. Like,
Yeah.
these treatments and stuff, I was spending so much money on them and they weren't helping at all. And so I just remember getting to the point where I was like, you know what, I should just be my own doctor. Maybe I'm not as good of a doctor as they are, but at least I'm cheap. You know? And at least the more I kind of experiment with my health over time, the better I'm going to get. And so I saw breaking out of the system as kind of an investment in my health and a way to spend less on my health in the long run. Which has definitely worked, by the way.
Yeah.
So were there a couple of key things that helped you with your back, or was it's cumulative of a lot of different things?
It's a whole lot of experimentation. I mean, I wouldn't have been able to fix my back at all if I hadn't taken off work. Actually, yeah, that was like the last straw. It was just like, my back is falling apart. I got to do something. Money and doctors are not going to fix the problem. Like I have to take matters into my own hands now. So the important thing is, if you have back pain or any kind of joint pain, is that your muscles are not working properly. Generally, it's because your muscles are too weak to actually hold the joints in proper alignment. And so when your muscles are too weak to hold the joints in proper alignment, then they start to get strained. You know, there starts to be a lot of shear forces on the joint, and the joint starts to get wear and tear, and then it starts to hurt a lot. So the solution is you've got to build up those muscles that are holding up the joint, and then once you do that, then the pain goes away.
Wow. Okay, this sounds so simple. I mean, it's obviously difficult to do.
Yeah, it is. If you don't know how to build muscle, first you have to learn.
Yeah.
And then you can do it, and that takes at least a few months probably. I mean, you can relieve joint pain temporarily pretty easily by just doing stretches and going to the chiropractor and whatnot. But if you want lasting relief, you have to build up those muscles that are supposed to be holding up your back.
Yeah, I can kind of attest to this. I didn't have severe back pain, but I've had back pain on this side that comes up when I sit down for a long period of time, particularly in work, probably because this is when I'm using a mouse and typing a lot. But just in a couple months of doing daily posture exercises and wall slides and things like that, that pain is completely gone.
Nice.
Wow. One thing I want to mention, I remember I read this article a while back, and it talked about this one style of living, which is like, I guess, 6 months on, 6 months off. So this guy would go to his job and save up as much money as he could, and then he'd go somewhere else, anywhere in the world, and live there for 6 months, and then return to his home country and work. And it seems to work pretty well. And he said a lot of people will have the concern like, well, if I go back, they're going to be like, what? So you weren't working for 6 months? But as soon as he starts telling some of the stories in the interview, they're like, whoa, who is this guy? This guy's a completely fresh perspective, traveled the world, and just stands out among the candidates. So it turns out that's not a problem at all.
Yeah, I really don't think there's much to be lost if you differentiate yourself in a creative way, as long as it's intentional about it. Like if the guy interviewing you asks something like, what have you been doing the past 6 months? And you're like, oh, I don't know, just laying around. But if you're able to say, well, I live this lifestyle where I do 6 months on, 6 months off, and I've been traveling around here, here, and here, and here's what I've learned, and this, and this, then you're a really interesting person that if they're looking for a temporary worker, they're going to want.
Yeah.
It just needs to be all part of the plan.
Yeah. All part of the plan. My former partner spent a couple of years basically just hitchhiking across the US, living in tents, traveling around. And if you frame it one way, he was a hobo. If you frame it another way and tell a compelling story, he got offered pretty high paying sales jobs on the spot just by talking about his life, not even when he was looking for a job in particular.
That is cool. Yeah. One thing that comes up sometimes is that people will say well, what can you do for free? I mean, if you're trying to save so much money, there's nothing you can do for free. Everything in this world costs money. And I'm like, these people have no imagination. But I can think of a few cool things. You could go for a walk in the park and meditate in nature. Buying a notepad and a few pens only costs a couple of dollars, and that's virtually free. And then you can express yourself and explore your imagination. Meeting people is also generally free. You go up to strangers and meet them, and that's almost always, well, sometimes it's harsh and you get rejected, but but on the long run, it's very enriching experience.
You can totally go to a bar and not drink anything.
Yeah.
What's maybe you can.
I've done it hundreds of times.
Yeah, I've done it many times.
Many times. Like, people are always like, all my friends just want to go out to bars and go out to, you can totally go and not get anything. And if you get in your head about like, oh my gosh, it's weird, people are gonna be judging me, then it is kind of like that. But if you just go in with confidence and say, no, I'm not gonna get anything, it's perfectly fine.
Yeah.
There's other fun hobbies that are actually money-saving hobbies. Like for me, a big thing was learning how to cook.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
And it's so much fun.
Oh, yeah.
And so rewarding.
It's so much fun, so rewarding. You can get so creative with it. You can eat way better food than you can at most restaurants. Because here's the thing I didn't realize about restaurants is, and unless it's a very expensive restaurant, they're only going to spend about 5 minutes preparing your food. You know, they have everything kind of set out and sauces made, and they're just going to throw it all together and then put it out, because it's not practical for them to spend an hour on someone's individual meal.
Right.
So if you take up cooking as a hobby, you can make such complex and delicious things.
And actually the health thing was probably the biggest thing for me. You know, just when you go out to eat, you really just don't know what's in the food that they're serving you. You can ask the waiters, hey, you know, can you give me a list of all the ingredients, or can you tell me, you know, if this ingredient is in it, or if this ingredient is in it, and if this ingredient is in it, and can we modify the dish if those ingredients are there? Can we modify it so that the ingredients are not there? You know, people just get really impatient and like, you know, like you're just like the, you know, you're the difficult customer. You're that guy, you know, if you do that. I mean, sometimes I do it anyway and just tip really well and try to be polite. But it's much easier to just get all the ingredients you want and then, you know, throw them in a delicious meal, you know, at home.
Yeah. Agreed. Cooking is a good free and or money-making hobby. Going out for walks, meeting people, exercise, or really anything can be free unless you're talking about specifically having someone else provide entertainment for you.
Yeah, that's the funny thing. Yeah, you kind of have to entertain yourself in any way, you know, any way you do it. You have to bring the magic because nobody else can really make something enthusiastic for you.
Yeah.
One thing that I really wanted to touch on is like another motivation why I decided to have a lot of free time in my life is that being an adult, like adult, you know, being adult versus being a kid, you know, adults are people who are good at stuff. They're people who have lots of life experience and they can get shit done. And they can do this because they've been practicing. And one of the things that I think millennials and, you know, maybe earlier generations too have started to lack is, you know, we go to school and then we get hired into this highly specialized, you know, career or position where we're doing this one thing just day in and day out. And so we're going to get really good at that one thing. But unless we have some free time, we're really not going to get good at anything else, including shopping and cooking and
personal finance.
And personal finance, yeah, and health. You know, like taking care of your own health is a skill. You know, if you get, you know, to a certain point in your life and you can't do any of those things, then you're going to be dependent on those industries to provide you those services. And so you're going to have to spend a lot more money than if you had just taken the time out to learn those skills yourself. But the important thing is that you will waste money at the beginning. Learning a skill, becoming good at a skill takes being bad at the skill, you know, at first. And so that's inefficient. When you first try to get good at a skill, yeah, you're going to waste a lot of time trying to figure out which things work and which things don't. But eventually you're going to hit your stride. Eventually you're going to get to the point where it's way more worth it for you to do that thing than for you to pay somebody else to do it.
I'm curious, after like a couple of years or some time living this like less structured, more nomadic lifestyle, do you guys see it as a permanent thing for yourselves, or do you see it as kind of like a learning phase or like a stage in life that's beneficial to get to a more focused place later on?
I mean, kind of both. Mostly the first one. Mostly, I think it's a permanent thing because I just like having more freedom. I like having more independence. I like doing things for myself because I have a lot more control over the end product, and I don't have to pay anybody to do it. But on the flip side, obviously, there are skills that other people have studied and practiced for years and years and years that I will never get as good at. And so, you know, over the course of time, you find those things and go, okay, well, I guess I will just pay somebody else to do that then. So, I mean, that's going to be some things, but generally I feel like I'm sort of driving my life. You know, I've taken as they say in the song by Incubus, you know, take the wheel and drive, you know, like I feel like I'm driving my life instead of, you know, just companies and corporations and sort of assertive personalities, you know, who have a lot of influence, you know, influential people that I'm around.
How about for you, Kurt?
It's hard to say because I don't have plans that far in advance, but I do expect that in the next couple of years, I'll probably be more settled in my location. We'll have to see what happens exactly though.
So I remember what I was going to say earlier. If you're done, Kurt.
Yeah, I'm done. Go.
So what I was going to say is that the process of solving a problem is kind of a cycle between divergent thinking and convergent thinking, right? Mm-hmm. So like at first, like, so the first solution that you should try when you're solving a problem is the brute force solution, the obvious solution, right? Just get something that works, right? And then from there, you can try other brute force solutions. You can try things that are sort of equally as good. And this is called divergent thinking, right? Like you just try other things, right? And you try as many of them as you can. And eventually, it kind of becomes obvious which ones are better than others and which things are more worth spending your time on than others. And you can apply the 80-20 rule, which is a really key concept that I got from the 4-hour Workweek, by the way, where you say, okay, well, you know, these things over here are only giving me 20% of my results, but I'm spending 80% of my time and effort and resources on them. And so I can just stop doing those things, and I can take the 20% of things that I'm spending my time and effort and resources which are giving me 80% of my results, and I can spend all of my time and resources on those things. And so that's convergent thinking, right? You're pruning, right? You're taking all of the things that you were doing and you're optimizing it. You're pruning it down to a more optimal solution. And then the cycle continues. And then you diverge and then you converge. And then you diverge and you converge. So.
Yeah. Or you diverge this way and then you diverge in the opposite extreme way and then you converge or something like that. 80-20 is a big thing. Right now, I'm a lot busier, and I'm kind of almost in the opposite phase as I was when I first moved to Mexico, when I was like, okay, I just want to give myself infinite free time and get my expenses as absolutely low as possible so that I have a ton of time to just do nothing and get to know myself and relax and like see what I want to do with my life and see where I want to go and just live a completely different lifestyle. Right now, I'm in kind of like a hard work phase where, you know, not everything's totally concrete and I'm just starting, but, you know, I have working with my friends at Autonomy, I have this podcast, I have my own media projects that I'm working on, and I'm like almost constantly working in one form or another. So the assumptions that I had to get rid of when I first went digital nomad were like, okay, you don't have to work 40 hours a week. You don't have to spend $2,000 a month. You don't have to have a traditional career. Like, you're not a failure if you do that. You don't have to do all of these things that society tells you that you need to do. And now I'm kind of in a place where I'm like, okay, work life, social life, and leisure life don't have to be separate. They can all be kind of the same thing.
Yeah, well, I like how Jeff Berwick and well, I guess Jeff Berwick said it first. He says, "There's when I'm on holiday, I'm working, and when I'm working, I'm on Did I say that right? When I'm working on holiday and when I'm holiday, I'm working. Like
Interesting.
there's not really a clear distinction between them. Like you can still come up with more opportunities when you're, in some tropical location or something, and you also enjoy when you're working. Like there's nothing bad
Right.
about it.
Yeah.
There's no resistance to it. So
I do think
Yeah.
that maybe not for everybody, but at least for me, there seems to be utility in defining which sections of time on my calendar are going to be work and which ones are going to be leisure. But kind of with everything that's a duality, dark, light, masculine, feminine, like the masculine actually, like the divine masculine, like the ideal form of the masculine actually has like the feminine inside of it. And then vice versa, like the divine feminine actually has some masculine in it, And so I completely agree with that quotation that you just said from Berwick, I guess, which is that, you can work while on leisure and you can have leisure while working.
Yeah, there is
Interesting
somewhat
perspective.
of a separation, and I do like have semi-defined hours, but things are a lot more of a blur than they used to be, and I'm kind of liking it. Maybe that'll only be another temporary phase, but that's where I'm at right now. In terms of the 80-20 principle, though, there's certain other things that I've come to realize that I was doing in kind of a silly way. Like lately, I've been getting my groceries delivered, which is new, and I had a lot of shame about getting my groceries delivered. Like you can't go grocery shopping by yourself. Like what an elitist kind of thing. Like you're hiring someone else to go get your groceries for you. But then I realized that the markup on the products is about 15%. So if I were to spend like $50 on groceries, let's call that a $10 additional, or like a $7 additional fee. But then I would also be spending an hour and a half and $3 Ubers each way.
Yep.
So I'm saving 2 hours and spending $1.
And you're contributing to the local economy. You're
Right.
paying sort of locals to do that work for you. And so what you're doing is actually you're contributing to that arbitrage process, which we talked about in the Borders episode, where basically you're bringing money from the connected West and you're putting it into this sort of poorer economy, thereby enriching the poorer economy and bringing it closer to the first world economy.
Yeah.
And how do you do this? Like, is it from Walmart or is there a local organization or what is it?
There's a service called Rappy, which I think is throughout Latin America, and basically it's a service that will deliver anything to you. They'll even take out cash from the ATM for you, but I don't think that the money on that too well.
So they'll go to not just a supermarket; they'll go to a regular market and buy a kilo of tomatoes for you.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
So my one experience with Rappy was one time when a friend was visiting from out of town. He was like, "Oh man, you got to try this mezcal. It's really good. This one brand of mezcal." And I was like, "Well, which liquor store do we go to buy this mezcal?" And he was like, "I don't know. You're the local. You should know like which liquor store to go to." I was like, "Well, I guess I just don't go to liquor stores that often." He was like, "I know. Let's go to Rappy. We'll just find that brand. And the guy will just go to whatever store he wants and bring it to us because he's going to know which store to go to." So we did it, and it was like, there was a markup, but it was definitely worth it.
Yeah, that's so cool. Yeah, they have that app. I don't know what it's called, but it's like when it's after midnight, you can't buy alcohol in Guadalajara. So you dial it up on the app, and the guy comes on his motorcycle and he's like, "Here's your booze."
I didn't know that
one. ask someone, they'll know it.
All right.
Yeah, that's amazing.
Yeah,
I'll have to check that out.
Yeah,
that's awesome. Yeah, but I broke everything down for a while where like I was doing everything by myself, like everything homemade food, doing all of my own chores, not spending any money on entertainment, and still being very entertained. But now I'm not just blowing money left and right. Like I think my living expenses are up to about $800 now, maybe. but it's a different
high
mindset.
life.
You're living like royalty.
Yeah. Yeah.
We could talk about travel stuff, like if there's ways you can travel cheaply.
Do you know?
I guess a lot of people know these days of like Skyscanner and Google Flights. Those make a huge difference. I mean, people tell me as well to go on Cheapo Air and stuff, but it seems like Google Flights and Skyscanner are where it's at, because you see the whole month.
Yeah.
And you can be like, yes, that's the cheapest day. That's that's a day you'll travel. But you do stuff like, I was leaving Australia and I wanted to know what's the cheapest route to get to Europe, because I know as soon as I get to Europe, there's going to be these, ridiculous €10 flights and stuff like that. So I went into, I think I went on to Skyscanner and I put Sydney to anywhere. And then I kept scrolling down until I found a place that was in Europe, and it was Athens. And so I get this flight to Athens, or I put it in, go to Athens, and then I'm like, all right, cheapest month. The month comes up, choose the cheapest date in that month. And it was like maybe a bit more than $300 to travel, all the way across the world.
Wow.
Sydney to Athens. And
Was
then
that round trip or one way?
that's one way. Yeah.
Not bad.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah. And even, like this flight coming up in a few weeks from Madrid to Chicago is like 113 pounds. It's like $180 or something. So, the world is getting smaller and smaller. And I think it's important to emphasize that too, as people think, like my friend's mom I was talking to the other day, she's like, oh, I can't believe these young kids these days traveling all over the world. It's crazy. But yeah, you can. And it doesn't cost that much. It seems to be getting cheaper every couple of years.
Yeah, travel doesn't have to be that expensive. Flights don't have to be that crazy expensive, like you said. Another thing is just don't stay in hotels ever.
Yeah, stay in Airbnbs.
Stay in Airbnbs, or even better, if you can, just like find a local website to rent a room from month to month, because Airbnbs are usually going to be marked up for tourist prices. But one thing that's been really helpful to me, both times that I've moved to different cities in Mexico, and I assume it would be helpful in other parts of the world also, is find an expat group, like on Facebook. There's usually large expat groups on Facebook anywhere that you would go, and just ask them, like, what's the best website to find a room? What's the best way to do this? Like, where's the best place to go shopping? Like, what are the apps that you should know about here? And that way you can really get like more insider information.
Yeah, that's how you found Casa Hamacas, right?
Yeah, so in Casa Hamacas, I found actually from a local guy in Guadalajara who lives here, who I knew. I asked him, like, what's the best place to look for like housing situations and roommate situations? And he recommended a couple different websites. And then from there, that's where I found Casa Hamacas, which was like a giant group share house mansion with 14 bedrooms that Chris and I were living in for a while. Me for a year, you for what, like 5 or 6 months?
Yeah, I moved out in January, moved in September. So yeah, it was like 4 months.
Yeah. Yeah. So that was a fun experience.
Yeah. And it was called Casa Hamacas because it had a lot of hammocks.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, it had a lot of hammocks. Also, maybe don't assume that like the world is so connected to the internet everywhere that you go, like especially if you're going to third world countries or like developing countries. A lot of the best stuff is like on the ground, and you just have to talk to locals and people that live there to figure it out.
Yep.
Like,
I thought you meant like you wouldn't get internet access, but you mean the business.
I
The
mean, like
information about the best stuff is not necessarily online. It's contained, socially within the people that live there.
Exactly.
And actually, that leads into what I was going to say about sort of travel advice, which is that, at least for Mexico, I've noticed that the longer I stay, the more information that I learn about how to live cheaply here. So when I first got here, I was very, it was very inefficient. I was just wasting a lot of money because, I was new, and so you end up paying like tourist prices for stuff. But eventually you figure out, oh, I don't need to spend that much money on stuff because you have the information, which allows you to spend less money. The other thing is that if you know the local language,
yeah,
you can tap into like the local social internet, the non-electronic internet, the people internet,
social networks.
Yeah, exactly. They existed before we had social media, so, and they're still there. And you just talk to locals if you know the language, and if you can understand the local language, you're gonna save so much money. You're gonna have such better information than if you're relying on the internet or even on like expat groups, because you become one of those local expat experts, and then you can help out sort of newbies. Yeah.
Expat groups aren't a one-stop shop for everything. If you can communicate with locals, that's definitely better. And also a lot of people do speak English around the world. So that's a really good luck that the three of us had, just having a language that's relatively universal.
Right.
Yeah. Speaking the local language helps a ton, but
yeah,
you can connect with locals in English as well. In most.
You can connect with locals in English, but I've noticed that a lot of times everything doesn't necessarily get communicated if you're speaking in English. So, you'll have communication, it just won't be as high quality communication.
Yeah.
And, they'll treat you a little bit differently since you're an outsider, whereas if you act like an insider, if you act like a local, then you'll get treated better, basically.
Yes, that's definitely true. I think probably the biggest example of this was like looking for housing. Here in Mexico, I found that looking for housing online, you're going to pay almost double as much as if you're looking for housing by like going door to door on the street. Yeah,
you're paying a huge convenience fee, basically.
Yeah,
which sometimes is worth it. If it's the first time to the city and you don't know anything, then it's worth it to pay that convenience fee. But once you've been there for a few months, it makes more sense to explore around and find better options.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do remember when it was like the second time I was looking for a house in Guadalajara, and I met up with my old housemate, and it's like, come on, Kurt, it's easy. And then just walk around the street and look for signs in people's windows saying room available, or just say, hello, how are you? And just ask them if they have a room. And the old people will be like, yeah, sure, you can stay in the room with my grandson, and I'll cook meals for you. And all this random stuff. But it's like I wouldn't think to do that in Australia, like in Sydney or something, to just walk around the street and say hello. Do you have a room? It probably wouldn't work that well, but different places have different techniques.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting how people in sort of first world countries kind of are not as trustful of random strangers as people in developing countries are.
Yeah, it's like a country town type attitude. It's like there's a sense of community and this kind of thing. Yeah.
Yeah, but even like towards outsiders, even towards people who are clearly, not from there. People in Mexico will be like, sure, yeah, like you said, sure, yeah, just come stay with me and I'll cook you meals or whatever, People in Australia, like, probably wouldn't do that, right? Even though they could,
Yeah.
And they probably can trust you, but.
Yes. I don't know how it works exactly. Because, like, say, I guess it's sort of about how fixed the contract is. So like when I was looking for a housemate in Melbourne, we would get a whole bunch of people in, like 5 or 10 people, and ask them, what do you think about this? And get the whole deal before you allow them to stay in the house. But in Mexico, a lot of the time it's like, well, I got a spare room, come in, move in. You move in tomorrow, whatever, doesn't matter. And then if it doesn't work out, I guess you could just leave.
Take them out. Yeah.
month to month, and there's no signing the lease or anything.
Yeah.
Generally.
Well, and as we were talking about earlier, I think this does kind of connect with the whole, like we were saying, you could just stay with an aunt or an uncle or a grandfather, or a grandparent or something like that, for a temporary, a limited time range, right? I assume if you're there after like 6 months or a year or something like that, and you haven't, maybe you haven't made very good friends with them, and you haven't like made movements to go do something else, then eventually they might get sick of you being there and kick you out. But like, I'm sure like just as a temporary thing, people would be much more likely to house you and take care of you in a developing country than they would in a developed country.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's much more of a culture. Well, I can only speak to having lived in Mexico, but there's a lot more of a community culture and a lot more like inter-reliance. Like maybe almost because it's harder for people to live here. Like it's easy as a foreigner to live here if you can earn US dollars, but I think it's a lot harder for locals to live here because the wages are so low. But because of that, like there's just a lot more of a culture of helping each other out. And that kind of inter-reliance.
I think it's also partly a culture of entrepreneurship. Like if they have a spare room, they're like, well, here's an opportunity for me, works out well for me and for them or whatever.
Sort of social networking, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, that too. Yeah, that's another angle. But it always seems like
networking.
Yes. It always seems like everybody in Mexico has some degree of business acumen, even if it's something small, like they've been a spruiker for a cookie stand or something. They'll know something about running a business.
Right. Well, actually, I was just thinking about this like yesterday, where this is kind of why I think that Latin America is about to boom, because the internet is the same way. On the internet, in order to make money on the internet, you kind of have to have skills as an entrepreneur. If you work for somebody else, you're going to have, you're going to have a lot of demands placed on you, and you're going to have, compensation that never quite feels enough. But if you know if you have like basic entrepreneurial skills, you'll have a good time on the internet. And that's why I think, again, like I think Latin America kind of has a similar culture to that as the internet, where everybody is kind of just like, well, I can't find, even the panhandlers, right? Like they don't panhandle. They come around, they're selling stuff. They're selling you candy. They're busking. They're washing the windows at the stoplights. They're just in the street, doing whatever they can, whatever hustle they can to make money. And that's exactly the right attitude for the internet.
That's 100% true. That was one of the biggest things I noticed here too, is just like the hustle and entrepreneurial attitude of the panhandlers. It was shocking. Like you very rarely see people who are just asking for money straight up.
Yeah, and people in the US on the other hand are like, there's no jobs anywhere, like
right.
I'm entitled to a job. And it's like, no, you're not.
Well,
go out and get that money. It's there for anybody who wants it.
In the US, in the US and in the West in general, I think our institutions are so strong and solid, and we're raised like so much in them that we just think about jobs as like something that are available or not. And like a job is a thing. You don't think about just doing work to trade, like if no job
making a job
exists or making a job. Or it's almost like this job is kind of like this hard concept, and there's a fixed amount of jobs in the economy, and like politicians talk about what we need to do to create more jobs, or there's less jobs. Like there's always work to be done, and people can do it if they take the initiative.
Right. Yeah. People don't realize that there's hustles. And Kurt, you made a great video about this. Like, I think you called it crypto hustling or something like that.
Yeah. Crypto hustler mentality. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Like you don't have to, like, in order to be an entrepreneur, people don't realize in the US that in order to be an entrepreneur, you don't necessarily need to like found a corporation and hire like 50 employees, like you can literally just see an opportunity for you to take some responsibility, and then you go do that thing, and then maybe people pay you for it, Like people don't see the hustling aspect of entrepreneurship.
This was a big mindset shift for me too, long before I ever started like hustling. I just decided to think of myself as an entrepreneur, even if I was an employee. Like, instead of thinking of myself as working for my employer, I started thinking of myself as working for myself. Like, I am providing my service to this employer and they're paying me this agreed upon amount.
Yeah.
And it's really a subtle shift, and it's one that you can't necessarily say out loud to every employer, or they might get turned off by that. But if you carry that in your own mind and like don't see them as some kind of authority figure over you, but rather like you're an independent person who's choosing to sell your time to this person for this amount of money, it really changes the way you look at things.
Yeah, well, it's subtle in the short term, but I think it's a big difference in the long term.
Yeah.
I do remember the last time, well, I guess it was the last time I was in Los Angeles on the metro, and a guy came in and he was carrying something covered with a blanket or something. And as soon as he got on, or as soon as the train pulled out of the station, he pulled off the blanket and he has like all these Snickers bars and stuff. And it's like, hey, selling Snickers $1. I was like, that is cool. Looking for opportunities there. And yeah, in Australia, it's a similar thing. Like, there's so many corporations. People think that they need to work for a big corporation, and they have this like chip that in their heads, it's saying, if you want to be an entrepreneur, that's something special. Like, you have to 8 out of 10 businesses fail in the first year.
Right.
That's a fucking stupid statistic.
Right,
I wish people would stop saying it.
Right, because if you're hustling,
fail the first three times.
Can you tell me more about how that's a stupid statistic? I'm kind of curious.
Okay. Well, I say it's a stupid statistic because yes, they do fail. It's true. So it's an accurate statistic, but the focus is wrong. Because yes, you fail the first year, you fail the second year, and then the third year you do something and it works really well. Yeah. So it's not like you only have one opportunity. It's not like you know.
It's not like 80% of people fail at being entrepreneurs if they set out to do it.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and the other thing is that, of course, like if you're hustling, you're not going to have like one hustle that you're doing. You're going to have like a bunch of hustles that you do. Right. And maybe some of them won't be profitable in the long term, but they'll probably be profitable in the short term. At least you'll be earning some kind of money. If you have to shut down the business and move, to some other hustle, then that's not the end of the world,
No, it's really not. And like, even among the businesses that succeed, like if you are thinking about startup culture, people talk about pivoting all the time. Like, a startup starts and then they pivot 5 times in the first year, which basically means that their business failed and they just completely switch what they're doing 5 times.
Right.
But they keep the same name, so it's a successful business.
And I do want to touch on maybe sort of a hypothesis as to why the cultures are different in developed versus developing countries with regard to hustling. And that is, in developed countries, in first world countries, there are a lot of regulations about who can do business and why and where and how. And so, and those regulations are often actually enforced. Developing countries maybe have those regulations, and they maybe have corporations which are entrenched, which have lobbyists who are maybe lobbying the local government to shut down their competition or something like that. But enforcement in developing countries is just a lot harder. And so I think maybe that has a lot to do with why people in third world countries are much more likely to have hustles, because they're much less likely to get randomly shut down because they're operating outside of the regulations.
Yeah. My buddy Aaron, he had this little business in Guadalajara selling bulletproof coffee or something, and he was doing it without a license. And he said the day that they came and shut down all the businesses that didn't have licenses, he was like, whoa, that changes perspective completely. Like, all this stuff I'd been saying to him about how government is force, it really clicked into place with him. And people don't realize that.
You, even in a developed country though, like as a freelancer or something like that, if you're selling skills online, I feel like you're pretty unlikely to be shut down. And a lot of hustles are in kind of a legal gray area.
Yeah, that's actually where the best opportunities are, where other people are kind of holding back because they're unsure of like all of the established players and what might happen to them if they start doing that business. You know, if you just have some cojones and just start the business anyway, and you start earning money, then you should be able to operate in a gray area until the enforcement action comes. And then I'm not necessarily recommending that you do this. I recommend, of course, that you know what all of the regulations are and follow them. But, you know, if an enforcement action comes, then at least you'll have money to deal with it, right? You'll be able to hire a lawyer, you'll be able to, you know, pay fines, you know, and you'll be able to keep operating basically. And you'll be able to bring yourself into compliance, basically.
It's a lot harder if you're dealing with anything physical or highly regulated, like food, for example. Like if you're trying to like start a restaurant and start selling food, that's something that can get shut down pretty quickly. But there's a lot of people that have little things online or do catering or
stuff
like that.
If I wanted to start a restaurant in Australia, what I'd probably do is have my living room and have a dinner club, like a Facebook group or something, and say, you know, maybe you pay a subscription like $20 a month, and you come in with your dinner token and eat dinner with us. And I suspect there's probably a lot of that going on. Jeffrey Tucker had some article about it, talking about illegal dinner clubs in New York City. And he was like, at what point do people, you know, realize that regulation's gone a little too far?
Yeah. At what point does this become an issue? Like I remember that reading an article, this was long before I was into any kind of libertarian philosophy. But I was a kid growing up, and there was an article in our local newspaper, the Minneapolis Star-Tribune, about a school bake sale being shut down because of health regulations.
Oh my God.
Regulations. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, but think about it. Think about it. You got a bunch of people just making cookies and brownies at home, and you don't know, like that could have salmonella. They're not coming out of a commercial kitchen. Like, are these people paying their taxes for their fundraiser for like the soccer team?
Exactly. And here's the thing is that there's still like, you know, if somebody gets salmonella from eating a bake sale cookie, they can still sue the parents or whatever who are.
Yeah, there's still a tort case.
You still have recourse.
Yes.
Yeah.
So preemptive action, maybe that's not so useful in that case.
Yeah, I don't know. But then can you only sue a person if there's money involved? Like if somebody gives me a cookie and I get salmonella from it, but it's just a buddy, can I sue them?
Yeah, absolutely. If you get food poisoning, you can definitely sue somebody for that. maybe you couldn't go to work the next day or something like that and lost some, you know, earnings or something. You can definitely sue for lost
if you
time.
couldn't sue them, I mean,
it's pretty harsh.
Theoretically, people could just go around giving people poison.
I guess so. Hypothetically.
Right?
Yeah. And not that people would do that, you know, like if you're an entrepreneur selling baked goods, like you're not gonna intentionally make people sick. You know, maybe you'll accidentally make people sick, and then hopefully you'll learn the lesson. You know, hopefully you'll be careful enough while you're doing it to not get people sick at all, and just follow like basic health practices.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, most entrepreneurs are not trying to, you know, maliciously damage the social fabric or like the health of people around them. They're just trying to make some money, you know.
They're just trying to make cookies.
Trying to make cookies
and make people smile.
Yes.
Not puke.
Right. Here's a question for you, Chris. You talked about the importance of knowing the language. What do you think the best way, or what are some of the best ways you learn to learn a language?
Well, for me, I only have experience with Spanish. I want to learn other languages and branch out and do all that as soon as I can. But For me, I grew up in Texas, and in Texas, there's lots of Spanish-speaking people, and there's most schools offer Spanish classes. And so basically, I just took Spanish classes all throughout my life when I was a kid, and I was constantly surrounded by people speaking Spanish, and I couldn't. So I had enough experience with it, and I was frustrated enough that I couldn't understand it, that I was like, okay, I'm going to finish the job, and I'm going to go just definitely learn this for sure. The number one thing I would say if you want to learn a language is go to the place where they speak that language, and don't speak English. Don't speak a native language there. Speak the language that you're trying to learn. The more you force yourself to think in that language, the more experience you'll get with that language, and the faster you'll learn it. In terms of, are you just asking about like strategies for how to learn a language?
Yeah.
So I would say, move to the place where they speak that language. That is like, if you do some other way, I mean, I've heard of people learning languages by having like, maybe an intimate relationship with somebody who speaks that language. And
the phrase is, the pillow is the best teacher.
Okay. Yeah, that was going to be my advice for language learning. That's how I've done it both times.
Yeah, like if you don't live in the place where they speak the language, and you don't have like a bunch of classes that have prepared you somewhat. I mean, so I had all these classes, and I kind of learned how the pronunciation works. I kind of learned how the grammar works, the structure of the sentences, and some vocabulary. I was getting rusty by the time I moved to Mexico, but I was it kind of jogged my memory just being around all this Spanish all the time. So if you don't have that, though, I would imagine that just having a close friend that you only speak that language with would be really useful. So.
I would say like learn some vocabulary, learn some grammar concepts if you can, but like just for a basic starting point, like once you get to the point where you can have somewhat of a conversation, then things come a lot more quickly.
Right.
But the best learning is through the action of it, because learning a language isn't like learning facts or memorizing something about history. It's creating like a different way of thinking in your mind. So you have to use it.
So another thing I would say is that if you do decide to go the route of immersion, and you decide to go move to a place where they speak predominantly the language that you're trying to learn, there are some strategies that are really helpful. The first thing is Uber. If they have Uber in the city, ride in Ubers and try to have a conversation with the Uber driver, because the Uber driver is trying to give you a good experience. He wants a good rating. And honestly, they give you a rating, and the friendlier you are, the better of a rating you're going to get. And so it's a really useful opportunity to just try to have a conversation in the local language. And it's also really useful because you can ask them just, what's your favorite thing about this city? Where's your favorite place to go? What's your favorite activity? What are some of the foods that I can try? What are some of the, artistic endeavors? What are some of the sites that I can see? And you can get a lot of good information that way, while at the same time practicing speaking the language. Another thing that I would say that has been really useful for me is CrossFit classes and yoga classes, because I already kind of knew how those things worked in English, having trained a lot in those things. And so if you have like a thing that you do just all the time, and you kind of know how it works, then when you switch to a different country and you do it in a different language, it's really easy to pick up the language, at least that's associated with those activities. So, when I first got to Mexico, I signed up for some yoga classes, and I quickly learned, all of the parts of the body, and like different directions, hacia el techo, hacia el piso, like, face this towards the roof, you face this towards the floor, like apoya, like support yourself, and you learn all of the things that are related to that activity. And so, and then once you learn those things, then you start listening to all of the grammar and the verbs and the conjugations and everything that are happening around that. And soon you get this like really, really solid understanding of everything that's being said, at least in that context. And then you can kind of use that as a jumping off point for other topics. So yeah, I would say like join activities that you already kind of know, but just in the other language. So that's another useful tool for me.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think Tim Ferris talks about that as well, especially his example was with martial arts. And I've heard people even go further and make this claim that there are no languages, only jargon, which is, I guess that's not entirely true, but there's something to it.
That's interesting. Yeah, you'll definitely find that even learning a language, you can't just learn a language from a book and then go apply it and get everything perfectly, because the slang and the jargon is so different from city to city and from person to person within that city. You really are learning different contexts.
Mm. I didn't have much exposure at all to Spanish when I started learning. I had started learning a little Portuguese beforehand, so that made it a bit easier. But one thing, or a couple of things I recommend to people when they're absolute beginners is the Pimsleur audio courses and the Michel Thomas audio courses. The Michel Thomas always points out the similarities between your language and the target language. So even with, say, if you're learning Russian, people might think, oh, Russian is so different to English. But no, of course, there are cognates, especially a lot of Greek words, like words that, for example, in English we have allergy, in Spanish it's alergia, and in Russian allergia, I think it is. So a lot of language you already know. So Michel Thomas helps you with that. Pimsleur is kind of slower, but it's more thorough. So I remember my friend Bob said he got to Peru and he listened through all the Michel Thomas Spanish, and he went into a cafe and then he was like, I don't know how to order a coffee. So Pimsleur tends to be more thorough when it comes to situational knowledge of the language. And then I learned a few ways. I guess it was a case of the pillow being the teacher as well, because I did have a few Colombian girlfriends. And when I was in Colombia the first time, I went to the university and studied this intensive course there. But the course finished around midday, so we'd go to the cafeteria and have lunch. And I would just go up and sit at people's tables and say, hey, can I sit here and can I talk to you, and start speaking to them in Spanish. And I think that probably made a big difference.
Yeah. If you can get in social situations and just force yourself to speak the language, whether that's romantic or not, I think that's the best way. I think it's just, there's a strong incentive to speak the language if you have like someone you're obsessed with who's speaking it to you. I like Duolingo. I don't think Duolingo is like the best language learning app in terms of how thorough it is or the process, but it's just extremely convenient. It's an app that's free. It teaches you vocab. It teaches you some basic grammar, and there's a community around it, and it's fun and quick. So I think that's like a good starting point. And then I didn't do this so much for Spanish, but I have previous experience with learning French. And also I took about a year of Arabic, but that's something I've mostly all forgotten. But in both of those cases, something that was really helpful for me was finding a Skype partner online if I wasn't going to actually go to the place. And I will say the majority of people are flaky, so it takes a while to find someone that you connect with and want to actually talk to for an hour a couple times a week, but that helps a lot. And most everywhere has language exchange meetup groups too, and that's something that I've done.
Yep. That was another thing I was going to bring up, is there's a meetup called Tandem GDL in Guadalajara. I think it's a part of an international network called International Tandems. And the way that it works is you just go to the meetup. There's a table for English, there's a table for Spanish, there's a table for German, there's a table for basically like whoever shows up gets to choose which language they want to practice. And then, if other people that show up also want to practice that language, then they get a table together and they just speak that language. And the cool thing is that there's no confusion about which language is going to be spoken, because the table just has a little flag, for that language. So that if you're at the English table, you have to speak English. If you're at the Spanish table, you have to speak Spanish. And a lot of times in just general social situations, it's not as clear which language is supposed to be the one being spoken. So that's really useful. And the other thing I was going to say is just to add on what Katy was saying about how like, yeah, just the more you practice the language, the better you're going to get. I mean, like really, the more you try to use the language in any given situation, the more you try to express yourself in any given situation, the better you're going to get at expressing yourself in that type of situation. And then the next time you do it, it's an iterated game. The next time you do it, you're going to be like, as long as you pay attention, as long as you, especially if you have people who can correct you, which a lot of times they don't. A lot of times people are just too polite to correct you. And actually, this is where the international tandems, like sort of the language exchange meetup, is really useful because people will actually correct you when you get stuff wrong. But you can also just have like Google Translate, or I have an app that's a Spanish-English dictionary called Spanish Dict, like DICT, like short for dictionary. And if I say something and I'm kind of like, I'm not sure if that was right, then I can just look it up online, and then I'm like, oh, next time I'm in this same situation, and I'm going to know how to use that word or that phrase or something. And then, it just goes from there. But it's an iterative process. And, if you think that you're going to be, talking philosophy in foreign language after a month, you're just mistaken. You have to put in the work and you have to put in the time.
Oh, here's something that I would add just in terms of learning a language. Don't be afraid to talk, and don't be afraid to make up words, because you're going to understand a lot more than you can speak. And that's going to feel extremely limiting. And a lot of times at the beginning, I would be too afraid that I would be making a mistake that I just wouldn't say anything at all.
Right.
So what I decided to do at some point was just basically say, fuck it. And if I felt like I had a word in my mind that was expressing the idea that I wanted to express, I would just roll with it, even if I wasn't sure if it was a word or not.
Right.
And I would say 9 times out of 10, people understand what I mean, and they'll just correct me and give me the right word.
Yep.
And maybe half the time it's actually the right word.
And I think it's important for, because people don't want to be rude, it's important to encourage people to correct you. And one of the ways that you can do that is by saying, estoy aprendiendo español. I am learning Spanish. Because if you say that, then, they know that they're not hurting your pride or something like that if they correct you,
Yeah, and also they won't switch to English if they speak English.
Exactly. Yeah. If you're like me when I first got to Mexico and you say, mi español es muy malo, then people will try to speak to you in English, even if their English is worse than yours. And then it's kind of like, no. I want to practice. I want to practice. You could also say, estoy practicando español.
So I guess a common theme is it's very important to have balls to learn. Like the ball, you have to get outside your comfort zone and talk to people, even in a language you're not comfortable with.
Yeah, whether you're talking language or I think if you're talking about living any kind of unconventional life, you just have to have balls. But it's really okay. I was a very timid person for a long time, but the more that I don't know, have balls, the more I realize it's perfectly fine.
The importance of having balls cannot be understated.
It really can't. Okay. So having balls, I kind of wanted to maybe like give an overall picture to people who are like interested in becoming digital nomads, or maybe not necessarily that, but just like leaving the whole traditional like go to college, get a corporate job, work until you're 65 and then retire kind of life. Like if you had a friend who is in that position, what would be the main advice that you would give them?
Ooh, that's a difficult question.
I mean, for me, I know a lot of people who actually love their job. And if you're one of those people, then, by all means, keep doing that job until you die. I mean, that's what everybody wants to do. Everybody wants to find a job that they love, and they're going to find some meaning and fulfillment doing that job forever. That's the goal. But if you're stuck in a job, if you feel like you're stuck in a job that isn't ideal for you, then get the hell out. Make a plan first, and then get the hell out.
Yeah.
You will not regret it.
Here's one thing that comes to mind. I like what Robert Kiyosaki has his speech, and he says a lot of people are afraid. They have fear, and he says that, but you got to switch this around. He says it's fear, fail early and responsibly. So start looking for ways that you can begin, even in a small way, like making a few dollars online or something like that, starting on your dream, risking a little bit. You don't have to risk everything all at once. Maybe you try and take an extended holiday, like you could get 3 months off from work and go to another country and see what you can do there. Those kinds of things are going to make a big difference.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me would just be to think outside the box a little bit and operate under the assumption that you're not actually stuck, and then just like look for all the different possible ways that you're not actually stuck.
Yeah, like start asking the question instead of saying, "Oh, I can't do this." Just saying, "How can I
do this?" Yeah. Reading the 4-Hour Workweek was a big help for me, even though I definitely don't work 4 hours a week. That book was just so full of kind of mind-blowing ideas about the different ways that you could set up your work life that I think it's worth a read for anybody.
For me, when I read that book, it was because I was trying to like divergent think. I was just like, I was kind of in panic mode, like right after I had quit my job. And I was like, what do I do now? And I read that book and I was like, oh, there's like infinitely many ways that I can earn money on the internet.
Yes.
I don't have to be worried, you know? I just have to go out there and get it, basically.
Yeah, I would so recommend that book. I would so recommend like looking on forums for digital nomads and people who are earning money online. Just like join some Facebook groups, just so you have like little pieces of input from people who are living those types of lifestyles in your life every day, and then ideas will start coming to you. Yeah, and you're not stuck.
I think it's partly about belief too. Like if you don't have an example of a person who's done this, then it's very hard for you to imagine. But once there's something a little more solid in your mind, then it gives you something to aim for.
Yeah, 100%.
One other thing about learning languages, I recommend people go on iTalki. That's italki.com. And you can find language partners on there, and you can also find tutors. So for a lot of the target languages, it's probably people from developing nations, so it's probably quite cheap, like a tutor for $5 an hour or something like that, which is amazing.
A thing that I wanted to actually talk about, which we never got to, and so it's sort of the end of the episode now, so maybe now's not the time, but I did want to talk about how just kind of traveling all the time and not having any roots anywhere got kind of tiresome to me. And I did have a lot of like a good feeling and some fulfillment by just kind of setting down roots in a particular place and then just like returning back to that place every now and then to kind of continue building my life there. I still like traveling and I travel a lot, but I can't do that thing where I just literally don't have any center. I don't have a home. A balance between being a nomad and staying in one spot is maybe ideal for some people.
Yeah, it's definitely ideal for me. I actually stay in one spot most of the time. Like when I first set out, I thought I was going to be a digital nomad. I thought I was going to move to Puerto Vallarta for like 3 months and then, go to a different part of Mexico and then go to Asia. Absolutely not. I've basically just been here for the past few years because I like having friends and I like building and like having a community that I see day to day. Something that's really important to me. It's not for everybody to just be living out of a backpack and traveling all the time.
Like it's nice to be able to.
It's amazing to have the option.
It's nice to be able to go back to a place after you're done traveling and see all those, those beautiful people that you're friends with and hang out with them and talk about what you did and just keep building, what you started instead of just like, well, goodbye forever. We were friends for 3 months that we knew each other and now I'm off, and I'll never see you again, Yeah. I feel like you can have much deeper relationships with the people and the community when you are sort of committed to sticking around for a while.
I think that's true. Although like the more I've been in this kind of life, the more that I've found that if you meet other people who are kind of on a similar wavelength and who move around often, like you can stay connected online and travel to places to meet each other also. And I mean, I don't know, it's definitely not as concrete as the people that I have here where I live, but I do have like several friends that have, been consistent in my life over the course of years, which I never would have thought because maybe we only met for 2 days once.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, it seems to happen quite a lot. It's kind of weird and wonderful.
You never
And
know
then
how
there,
it's going to shake out.
and then there are conferences like Anarchapulco and Bitcoin conferences where you kind of do run into the same crowd, over and over again. And
Yeah.
so that's cool. You have your kind of, local community, your local tribe, and then you have your kind of like internet tribe. And
Yeah.
it's nice to meet face to face with both of those groups from time to time.
Yeah, I think that's true. You said something interesting earlier. I don't remember if it was before we flipped on the recording or not, but about how I think one of the defining things of all of us on the Crypto Hippies is we're more like internet citizens than citizens of any particular country. And that's really how it feels. That's really how it feels.
Yeah. Crypto hippies.
Citizens
A
of
new culture for the internet generation.
yeah, the new citizens of the world.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Citizens of everywhere and nowhere.
Yeah, or just internet citizens.
Right.
Yeah. I do very much feel that the internet is my home more than anywhere else.
Yeah, agreed.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us, Crypto Hippies. If you haven't subscribed, you should totally subscribe. And also we have a website. It's cryptohippiedrumcircle.com. Woo! Check us out. You can be in communication with us on our Telegram chat. We like to have lots of heated debates about everything from flat Earth to whatever.
we keep it nerdy and we keep it real.
We keep it real and we keep it nerdy.
That's another tagline, I think. Cool.
All
right. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.